Millionaire forced to marry the plain bride, her true identity, left him speechless. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The boardroom was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. The scent of espresso and polished wood filled the air. Adrian Blake, 34, CEO of Blake Enterprises, sat at the head of the table. His jaw was tense, his eyes fixed on the legal document spread open before him. His father's lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Blake, according to your late father's will, if you do not marry within 30 days, the board will transfer controlling shares to your uncle's division. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but cold. So that is what this is about. My father wanted a puppet, not a son. The lawyer slid a folder across the desk. There is a solution. A woman who agreed to the arrangement. Discreet, educated, unconnected to your competitors. Her name is Clara Evans. Kauai. Adrian scanned the photograph clipped to the file. A modest face. No heavy makeup, plain dress. Nothing that screamed ambition or glamour. He exhaled sharply. She looks ordinary. Sometimes ordinary is exactly what you need, the lawyer replied quietly. That evening, in a quiet cafe downtown, Clara sat across from him. She wore a pale blue blouse and held her coffee cup as if it were a shield. Her calm eyes met his without flinching. You understand this marriage is purely contractual? Adrian asked, his tone clipped. I do, she said softly. 6 months, complete discretion, and we go our separate ways. You keep your company. I get the financial independence I need to pay my mother's medical bills. He studied her, expecting nervousness or greed. Instead, there was quiet dignity. Fine, 3 rules, he said. 1, no personal questions. 2, no media exposure. 3, no falling in love. Quote. Clara's lips curved into a faint smile. You have nothing to worry about, Mr. Blake. Love is not something I can afford. For a moment, something flickered in his chest, irritation or curiosity. He could not tell. He signed the papers, slid the ring box toward her, and said simply, the ceremony is tomorrow. Wear something appropriate. The next morning, the city shimmered under a veil of rain. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as Adrian stepped from his black sedan, his expression unreadable. Clara followed behind, wearing a simple ivory dress that brushed her ankles. There were no jewels, no veil, only the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly why she was there. As they exchanged vows, Adrian barely looked at her. To him, this was business, nothing more. But when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Clara whispered, "Thank you for keeping your promise," he hesitated. For the first time, her voice did not sound transactional. It sounded sincere. That night, at the Blake mansion, Adrian poured himself a glass of bourbon, staring at the rain outside. His assistant entered quietly. Sir, the press is calling her the plain bride. They say the Blake empire has finally fallen to desperation. Adrian's jaw tightened. Let them talk. By the time this deal ends, none of it will matter. But later, when he walked past the guest room and saw Clara kneeling by the fireplace, drying her wet shoes with a towel instead of calling a maid, something unexpected stirred in him. She did not belong to his world of glass walls and power games. Yet there was something grounding about her presence, something he had not felt in years. He told himself it was pity. He told himself it was temporary. But as he watched her quietly hum to herself, her reflection flickering in the firelight, he began to wonder if the plain bride might be anything but plain at all. Days turned into weeks, and the arrangement that was meant to be emotionless began to blur its own boundaries. Clara adapted to life inside the Blake mansion with quiet grace. She spent most of her mornings tending the small garden behind the glass terrace, trimming roses that had long been neglected. The staff watched her in surprise. No one had ever seen the mistress of the house carry her own watering can before. Adrian noticed. He often found himself standing by the window of his office, pretending to read reports while watching her through the glass. There was nothing glamorous about her, yet something about her calm persistence unsettled him. She never demanded attention, never sought validation. She simply existed steady, serene, and impossible to ignore. At the breakfast table one morning, the sound of silverware broke the silence. Adrian looked up from his phone. Clara was pouring tea, her movements careful and elegant. You do not have to do that, he said. She looked at him, puzzled. Do what? Serve me. The staff can handle it. I know, she replied, her voice gentle. But I grew up making breakfast for my mother. Old habits are hard to break. He wanted to argue, but stopped himself. Something in her tone reminded him of humility, a language he had forgotten. Later that day, they attended their first public event together, the annual Blake Foundation Charity Gala. Adrian walked in with the poise of a man used to power, but the whispers followed them. The plain bride, the pity marriage, the contract wife. Cameras flashed like lightning. Inside the ballroom, a reporter stepped forward. Mr. Blake, how does it feel to marry someone so ordinary compared to your usual company? Adrian's jaw tensed, but before he could respond, Clara smiled gracefully. Ordinary is relative, she said. If being ordinary means knowing how to care for people, then I am proud of it. The crowd went silent. For a moment, even the clicking cameras paused. Adrian turned to look at her, a flicker of admiration breaking through his cold mask. When they returned home, the air was quiet. Clara removed her heels by the door and turned to him. You do not have to defend me, she said. I knew what they would say. You should not have to endure that, he replied. She smiled faintly. I have endured worse. Then she walked down the hall, leaving him with more questions than answers. The following week, Adrian invited her to accompany him on a business trip to Chicago. It was meant to be a simple public appearance, nothing more. But on the private jet, he found himself glancing at her book resting on the seat beside her. The cover read, The Art of Empathy. You read philosophy? He asked. I study people, she answered, not looking up. Sometimes empathy teaches more than strategy. He chuckled softly. In my world, empathy is a liability. Then maybe your world needs changing, she said, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, Adrian felt the wall around him shift. When they landed, she walked beside him through the airport, her composure unshaken by the attention they drew. By the time the conference ended that evening, even his business partners were asking who she was. On the flight home, Adrian loosened his tie, exhaustion softening his usual restraint. You surprised everyone today, he said. Including me. I only said what was true, Clara replied. Your company speaks about innovation, but innovation should start with kindness. He studied her for a long moment, the hum of the engines filling the space between them. You really believe that, do you not? I do, she said simply. Back at the mansion, a storm gathered outside. Rain tapped against the windows like a restless rhythm. Adrian poured himself another drink, his thoughts circling back to the quiet strength of the woman he had married for convenience. In the dim reflection of the glass, he caught sight of her walking down the hall, a cup of tea in her hands. You are still awake, she said, stopping by the doorway. Could not sleep, he admitted. Too many numbers in my head. She placed the cup on the table beside him. Try tea instead of bourbon. It helps. He looked up at her, surprised by the gentle concern in her tone. You really think it will fix me? No, she said, smiling softly. But it might remind you that you are still human. For the first time, Adrian laughed quiet, unguarded, real. The sound startled even him. As she walked away, the warmth of the tea lingered longer than the taste of the drink. That night, in the silence of his room, he found himself replaying her words. The woman he had dismissed as plain was beginning to change something far deeper than he ever intended his heart. The weeks that followed carried a quiet shift neither of them dared to name. The mansion, once filled only with the echo of footsteps, now hummed with something softer like the faint rhythm of two lives beginning to overlap. Adrian still spent his mornings buried in meetings, but his evenings often ended in the same place, the garden, where Clara knelt among the roses, her hair glowing gold under the porch light. One night, he stopped beside her. You know the gardeners can handle this, he said. I know, she answered without looking up, but they trim too quickly. Roses need patience. He crouched beside her, loosening his tie. You talk about flowers as if they are people. People and roses are not that different, she said. They bloom only when they feel safe. Her words landed deeper than she realized. For years, Adrian had been surrounded by people who wanted something from him: status, power, connection, but never safety. For the first time, he wondered what it might feel like to have that. That weekend, Clara suggested visiting his father's foundation center to review the school project under his family's name. It was a rare moment of vulnerability for him. He had not returned there since the funeral. When they arrived, the building felt colder than he remembered. The walls displayed photos of his late father shaking hands with politicians, smiling for cameras. "You never liked this place, did you?" Clara asked gently. "It was built for reputation, not purpose," Adrian replied. "My father believed generosity was a transaction." Clara studied one of the photographs. "Maybe you can change that now." He turned toward her. "You really think one person can rewrite a legacy?" "I think one choice can," she said simply. Later that afternoon, as they walked out, he noticed her pause near the children's art display. A small painting caught her attention, brush strokes clumsy but full of warmth. Beneath it was a signature. C. Evans, age 10. Adrian blinked. "That is you?" Clara smiled shyly. "My elementary school donated to this program years ago. I never thought my painting would still be here." For a moment, he saw her differently, not as the quiet woman who signed a contract, but as someone who had always believed in something real. That night, the sky opened in a thunderstorm. Power flickered in the mansion, and the lights went out completely. Clara lit candles in the hall while Adrian checked the circuit breaker. When he returned, her hair was damp from the rain blowing through the open window. "You look like a ghost," he teased lightly. "Then you should be careful," she said, smiling. "I might haunt your perfectly ordered world." The laughter that followed was unexpected. For once, it did not feel forced. The air between them warmed, charged with something unnamed. As the rain eased, she sat by the fireplace, holding a mug of cocoa. "Why do you keep everyone at a distance?" she asked quietly. Adrian stared into the flames. "Because closeness always comes with an agenda. The moment people see weakness, they use it." She tilted her head. "Not everyone wants something from you." "Do you not?" he asked, meeting her eyes. Her voice softened. "I only want peace. You were part of the deal, not the dream." Her honesty disarmed him. He had expected ambition or calculation, not truth. The room fell into silence, broken only by the crackle of fire. Later, when she excused herself for the night, Adrian remained there, replaying every word. For the first time in years, he felt something heavier than loneliness, regret. The next morning, he found a small note beside his coffee cup. "Thank you for the tea last night. The world feels lighter when you laugh." It was written in her graceful handwriting. He held the note longer than he intended. That simple line, the kind that expected nothing in return, felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. By the end of that week, even his staff began to notice the change. The man once feared for his cold precision now smiled in the corridors, stayed late to listen, and occasionally stopped to ask about their families. When his assistant asked what caused the change, he only said, "Someone reminded me that kindness does not weaken power. It defines it." Quote. What neither of them knew was that outside their growing harmony, someone else had begun to take notice. A shadow from Adrian's past, his ambitious cousin, Leonard Blake, was quietly planning to expose their fake marriage and reclaim control of the company. For now, the storm had passed, but the next one was already forming on the horizon. The calm did not last. Rumors began to spread like wildfire through the business world, whispers that Adrian's marriage was nothing more than a contract, a staged performance to protect his inheritance. Headlines called it the Blake arrangement. The gossip alone might not have shaken him, but the evidence that surfaced was too specific to be coincidence. Private documents, copies of their contract, and a blurred photo from the courthouse leaked online. In the center of the storm was Leonard Blake, Adrian's cousin and rival, the man who had always coveted both the company and the spotlight. At the morning board meeting, he slid a folder across the polished table, his smirk barely contained. "The board deserves transparency, cousin. The shareholders are questioning the legitimacy of your marriage. If it is proven false, your father's clause is void. Control reverts to me." Adrian's expression hardened. "Be careful with your accusations, Leonard. Lies have a way of circling back." Leonard leaned forward. "Then explain this." He opened the folder to reveal copies of Clara's bank statements, showing large anonymous transfers that coincided with their wedding. Adrian's pulse tightened. He knew immediately that Leonard had planted the money to frame her. Still, the damage was done. The board demanded an investigation. The marriage that had begun as a contract was now treated like a scandal. That evening, Clara waited for him in the library, unaware of the storm outside their walls. When Adrian walked in, his face was pale from anger and exhaustion. "We have a problem," he said simply. She listened in silence as he explained what had happened, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she said softly, "You think I had something to do with it?" He shook his head immediately. "No, but they will. The board is calling for proof that our marriage is real." Quote, Clara took a slow breath. You mean proof that I am not a fraud? Clara, I can fix this, he said quickly. I will clear your name. She stood, calm but firm. You cannot fix something that began as a lie, Adrian. We both agreed to pretend. Now we are paying for it. He moved closer, his voice low. Do not walk away. Not now. Her eyes met his, steady and sad. If I stay, they will destroy everything you have built. I will not be the reason for your fall. You. Before he could stop her, she removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table between them. You once told me people bloom only when they feel safe, she whispered. But I do not feel safe anymore. Then she walked out of the room, leaving him with the echo of his own words. The following days blurred into a haze of headlines, accusations, and silence. Adrian refused to speak to the press, but the world had already made its judgment. The woman who had quietly restored his humanity was now painted as a con artist. Late one night, Adrian found himself alone in the garden where Clara used to tend the roses. The petals were drying, the soil untended. He knelt beside them, running his hand through the dirt as rain began to fall. For the first time in years, the weight of his own pride crushed him. His assistant arrived with an envelope. Sir, this came for you, no return address. Clothing. Inside was a handwritten note. Do not let them rewrite what we both know was real. Beneath the note was a photograph, Clara at a charity center surrounded by smiling children, the same foundation that bore his father's name. He stared at the photo for a long moment, the truth dawning painfully clear. She had been there long before their marriage. She had never been after his money. She had been building something of her own quietly, selflessly, without needing anyone's approval. Adrian rose from the wet ground, rain soaking through his shirt, and whispered into the storm. I was wrong. For the first time, it was not the empire he feared losing. It was her. 2 weeks passed before Adrian found the courage to face her again. The board had suspended his authority pending review, and Leonard was already acting as interim chairman. The mansion that once felt alive was now a hollow monument of glass and silence. Every trace of Clara, the folded blankets, the scent of her tea, the flowers on the kitchen table had disappeared. But one thing had not left him, the photograph from the envelope. In it, she stood under a faded banner that read Artemis Foundation. The same foundation his company had refused to fund years ago, calling it unprofitable. He remembered the kindness in her voice, the steady conviction when she spoke about changing lives. Everything made sense now. She had never been an opportunist. She had been a believer. Driven by a need that went deeper than pride, Adrian followed the address printed on the back of the photo. The building was small, tucked between a pharmacy and a laundromat in a quiet neighborhood. Paint peeled from the sign above the door, but laughter drifted from inside, warm, human, real. When he stepped through the doorway, a dozen volunteers turned to look. At the far end of the room, Clara was sorting boxes of supplies. For a moment she froze. Then, without a word, she continued her work. Adrian approached slowly. You left without telling me where you went, he said. You had your answers, she replied, not looking up. I had accusations, he corrected. Not answers. Finally, she faced him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were tired. Why are you here, Adrian? He hesitated, searching for words that would not sound rehearsed. Because I was wrong. You were never the lie, Clara. I was. Cried. She crossed her arms. It is too late for apologies. You have a company to save. He shook his head. It does not mean anything without you. Do you know what I did this morning? I resigned. I walked away from everything that came with my father's name. Clara blinked, stunned. You what? I turned over control to Leonard, he said quietly. Let him have the empire he wants so badly. I am building something else, something true. He glanced around the modest room. Like this. Quote, for the first time her composure faltered. You do not owe me that. I do not, he admitted. But I owe myself the man I was supposed to be. The man you saw when no one else did. A long silence filled the space between them. Then she said softly, you cannot just walk in and rewrite everything. I am not asking to rewrite it, Adrian replied. I am asking to start a new chapter with you if you will let me. The sound of children laughing from the next room broke the tension. Clara turned toward the noise, then back at him. If you are serious, she said, then help me rebuild this place. No headlines, no contracts, no promises you cannot keep. He smiled, a real one this time. Deal. Over the next few weeks, Adrian became a quiet presence at the foundation painting walls, unloading supplies, learning the rhythm of her world. The media eventually discovered his resignation, but instead of shame, the public saw humility. The same board that had dismissed him began to reconsider who truly represented the Blake legacy. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Clara found him repairing a broken sign outside the center. "You missed a spot," she teased gently. He turned, his hands streaked with paint. "You know, for a woman who claims to be done with contracts, you are very good at giving instructions." She laughed, and for the first time since everything fell apart, the sound felt like home. That night, when he reached for her hand under the warm glow of the sign, she did not pull away. In that simple gesture, without words or signatures, they began again no longer a contract but a choice. The following months unfolded like a quiet redemption. Adrian no longer wore tailored suits or gave orders from behind glass walls. He arrived at the foundation each morning in rolled-up sleeves, unloading boxes, listening, learning. For the first time, he was not leading an empire. He was serving one small purpose at a time. The foundation began to change. Donations increased, volunteers grew in number, and local news featured their rebuilding story. The narrative shifted from the Blake scandal to the Blake renewal, yet Adrian barely noticed the attention. His focus was on Clara, her steady hands, her calm presence, the way she spoke to people with genuine care. One evening, as they finished repainting the community hall, Clara stood on a ladder reaching for the final corner. Adrian steadied the base for her. "You are going to fall if you keep stretching like that," he said. She smiled down at him. "You are learning to worry. That is progress." "I have always worried," he said softly. "I just used to hide it behind control." She looked at him for a long moment before stepping down. "You are different now." "I am trying to be honest," he replied. "It feels new." The next morning, a black sedan pulled up outside the foundation. Leonard stepped out, impeccably dressed, his arrogance as polished as his shoes. "You have made quite the spectacle, cousin," he said with a smirk. "The fallen millionaire turned volunteer. The board wants you back. Public sympathy is good for business." Adrian crossed his arms. "You can keep the company, Leonard. I am not interested." Leonard laughed. "You think sweeping floors and painting walls will save your reputation?" "I am not saving my reputation," Adrian said. "I am saving myself." Leonard sneered. "Then you are more of a fool than I thought." As the car drove away, Clara stepped beside him. "You could have gone back," she said quietly. "I already did," he answered. "Back to what matters." Weeks later, the foundation hosted its first anniversary under their joint leadership. The hall was filled with laughter, music, and gratitude. Adrian stood at the podium, nervous for the first time in years. When the crowd hushed, he said, "This place began as her dream. I was only smart enough to follow it. Clara taught me that success without purpose is emptiness wearing a suit." The room erupted in applause. Clara, standing off to the side, felt tears sting her eyes. When he stepped down, she whispered, "You did not have to mention me." "I had to," he said, "because everything worth doing started when you walked into my life." As the evening light streamed through the windows, Clara reached for his hand. No contracts, no conditions, just quiet trust. Around them, the people they had helped clapped and laughed, but in that moment, it felt as though the world had fallen away. The man who once measured worth in profit had finally found value in love, and the woman once called plain had become the most extraordinary thing he had ever known. The night of the anniversary ended with quiet music and soft laughter, but peace never lasts forever. Just as the guests began to leave, a courier arrived at the door with a thick envelope addressed to Adrian Blake. He opened it under the dim hall lights, and his expression changed from calm to disbelief. Inside were legal documents, an injunction filed by Leonard Blake, claiming that Adrian had misused company resources to fund the foundation. Clara saw the color drain from his face. "What is it?" she asked. "Leonard is accusing me of fraud," Adrian said quietly. "He is trying to destroy everything we built." Over the next few days, news outlets once again swarmed with headlines. Leonard's lawyers claimed that Adrian had transferred millions into Clara's project. They framed it as a cover-up for embezzlement. Every donation, every construction expense was questioned. The world that had just started to trust them turned skeptical overnight. Clara wanted to fight back immediately, but Adrian stopped her. "Let me handle it," he said. "I know how his mind works." "You cannot face him alone," she warned. "He will twist everything." "I know," he replied. "But this time, I have nothing to hide." A week later, the board called for a public hearing. The press filled the lobby, cameras flashing as Adrian walked in hand with Clara. Leonard was already waiting inside, smiling like a man who had already won. During the session, Leonard's lawyers presented their fabricated evidence. Every transaction appeared suspicious until Adrian stood and spoke calmly. Yes, I authorized the funds. Every cent went to rebuild the Artemis Foundation, which my father's company had promised to support years ago and never did. The records are public. Anyone can verify them. Then he turned to the board. If helping a community center is a crime, then I am guilty. But if leadership means integrity, then you already know where I stand. The room fell silent. The auditors reviewed the foundation's accounts and, to Leonard's horror, found perfect transparency. Every dollar had been recorded, every receipt verified. The chairman looked up. Mr. Blake, it seems you have nothing to hide. These accusations are baseless. Leonard's composure cracked. You cannot prove intent, he shouted. Adrian looked at him steadily. I do not have to prove intent. My actions did that for me. Security escorted Leonard out as murmurs rippled through the hall. For the first time, Adrian felt no triumph, only relief. Outside, Clara waited at the bottom of the marble steps. The rain had started again, just as it had on the day they first met. When he reached her, she said softly, "You could have exposed him years ago." "I needed to become the man who could do it the right way," he answered. She smiled through the rain. "You finally did." Quote. As they walked away, reporters shouted questions, but Adrian did not respond. His hand tightened around hers. The storm was ending, and for once, he was not fighting it, he was walking through it, beside the only person who had ever seen him clearly. The scandal faded as quickly as it had begun. Within weeks, the headlines shifted from accusation to admiration. The same newspapers that once called Adrian a fraud now praised his integrity. The board voted unanimously to restore his position as CEO, but this time Adrian declined. Leadership, he told them, is not about titles. It is about service. He devoted his time entirely to the Artemis Foundation, transforming it into a nationwide program that provided scholarships, housing, and mentorship for underprivileged youth. Every major network wanted interviews, but he refused them all, saying, "The work should speak louder than the man." Clara stood by his side through it all. Together, they built something more powerful than either had planned, a movement rooted in kindness, not control. Yet even in their success, Adrian carried one quiet question he had never voiced. One evening, as the city lights shimmered across the skyline, he found the courage to ask it. They were on the rooftop of the Foundation's new headquarters. The night air was cool, the hum of traffic distant below. Clara stood near the railing, watching the lights flicker like stars. "Clara," he said softly. She turned, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "When we began all of this, I told you not to fall in love, but I never said what would happen if I did." Her breath caught. "Adrian," he took a slow step closer. "I fell in love with you, not because you saved my company, but because you saved me from myself." He pulled from his pocket a small velvet box, worn and familiar, the same one from their contract wedding. He opened it, revealing a simple gold ring. "This time," he said, his voice steady. "No signatures, no conditions, just a question." Tears welled in her eyes. "You already know my answer," she whispered. "Say it anyway," he urged. "Yes," she said, barely louder than a breath. 1,000 times yes. The city seemed to pause around them. The wind carried her laughter, and the lights below glimmered like witnesses. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, the same hand that had once signed their contract. Now it bore something infinitely more real. Later that night, as they sat side by side, she rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we started?" she asked. "Every day," he replied, "and I thank fate for every wrong turn that led me to you." She smiled. "We began as a deal, but we became a choice." He nodded, his voice low but certain. "And choice is the only promise that lasts." Quote, "The world might still see him as the millionaire who once staged a marriage for inheritance, but for Adrian Blake, that chapter had ended. What remained was a new kind of legacy built not on power, but on love that asked for nothing and gave everything in return." 1 year later, the city awoke to a new morning and a new beginning for Adrian and Clara Blake. The grand opening of the Blake Artemis Community Center drew hundreds of visitors, from local families to former students whose lives the foundation had changed. The building, once a dream scribbled on Clara's old notepad, now stood proudly in the heart of downtown, a symbol of hope built from their shared courage. Adrian stood near the entrance, greeting guests with a warmth that surprised even him. He no longer wore the cold mask of a corporate man. His tailored suit had been replaced by rolled sleeves and a humble name tag that read simply Adrian, volunteer. Clara moved through the crowd beside him, her laughter soft but steady, her smile unguarded. She was no longer the plain bride the world once mocked. She had become the heart of everything he valued. When the ribbon was finally cut, the crowd erupted in applause. Reporters called out questions about profits, expansion, and branding. But Adrian raised a hand and said, "There are no profits to measure today, only people. This center is not about building wealth. It is about rebuilding worth." His voice carried calm conviction, the kind that came not from pride but from peace. Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, the last of the guests drifted away. Adrian and Clara remained alone in the courtyard, surrounded by rows of glowing lanterns strung between the trees. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine and fresh paint. Clara placed her hand in his. "Do you ever miss the old life?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "Sometimes I miss the noise, but then I remember the silence that came with it, and I would rather have this laughter, children running through the halls, a world that feels alive." She leaned closer. "You kept your promise, Adrian. You built something true." He shook his head gently. "We built it. You showed me that strength is not control. It is compassion. And love." He paused, meeting her gaze. "Love is not a weakness. It is the greatest act of leadership." She smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "So what now, Mr. Blake?" He laughed softly. "Now we keep doing what we do best. We start over, every day." As they walked together toward the glowing sign above the center's entrance, Clara noticed the old contract framed on the wall inside the same one that had once bound them in pretense. Beneath it hung a small gold plaque, engraved with just 4 words: "New Deal, True Love." Outside, the city lights shimmered like quiet applause. The millionaire who once measured life by numbers had finally learned the true equation of happiness: compassion plus purpose equals forever. And beside him, the woman who once entered his world as a contract bride had become his home, his partner, and the proof that love built on integrity can rewrite even the coldest destiny.